Hello, welcome back to the channel. Today's little video is going to be about macro and focus stacking stroke focus blending. It's a little bit windy still. It's the back end of the storm we had last weekend. I think it's still going on. I'm probably going to go out a bit later and do some landscape photography around the coast. I'm not quite sure where yet, probably somewhere around Broadstairs, Margate Way, which is about a 50-mile trek from my house to there. But in the meantime, I think I'll just take some nice macro shots and talk you through it. The focus blending part will be done using one Photoshop and also using a second piece of software called Helicon Focus, which I was introduced to a year or so back by a friend of mine, which does in most cases a very excellent job when Photoshop struggles and vice versa. Sometimes or Helicon struggles and Photoshop can do a better job manually. Anyway, I'm going to take you into the kitchen where I've got a little it's a still life setup with some seashells and some pebbles from the beach, and the camera will be tripod mounted to give it a nice bit of security and stability, and I'll talk you through the different images I have to take to achieve the necessary depth of field, and then we'll go to the computer and we'll actually put those in, blend them and see what the end result looks like. Anyway, let's get on with it. Okay, here we are, we're in my kitchen. I've got the kitchen table here in front of us, and on the kitchen table I'll cut to what I've set up here. I've actually set a little still life up with some pebbles from various beaches around the planet that I've been to. I've got the A7R4 mounted on the tripod, and I've also got, if you look carefully, the extension ring on there, which is it's only a 10mm extension ring. That's getting me close in and tight in on that little display here of the shells and the stones together. Now my problem here is that even at sort of f11, which is showing at the moment, I can't get the foreground and the background in focus. I can focus on something in the foreground quite happily, but if I then focus on something in the background, the foreground's out of focus. So I'm going to take a series of shots here. They'll each be focused on a different part of the scene in front of me, and because it's slightly tilted away, that's obviously adding a bit more to the depth that the image needs. So what I'll do is no more about it, but get on with taking some shots. So the first one, I'll focus on the center point here being, I've moved the little red dot along, you can see I've moved it to the closest point, which is the raised part on the shell. And if I now adjust the focus manually, because we can't use autofocus for this, you can see there's a lot of detail there, and that's giving me a 2-second f11 exposure with minus 0.7 EV, just to pull the highlights down that are in the shot. So I'm going to take that shot. I've got a 2-second timer because although the tripod is here, it's a little bit precariously sort of perched, as you can probably see. It's braced up against the table in one part, and two legs are extended much more than the third leg, so it's not as stable as perhaps it could be, but I needed to get it at that angle to be able to look down on the subject here. So let's take that shot. Where's my 2-second timer gone? I didn't hear that beeping. Oh, it's come off being on a 2-second timer. Okay, we'll put it back on. So I've focused that as I want it now. That's as close to being perfectly focused as I can get it. So that's the first image going down now. 2 seconds, done. I'll just check that on the back of the camera to make sure that is completely in focus. And if I zoom in, yes, there's lots and lots and lots of detail there, which is what I'd hoped for. So now I'm going to move the focus point on the image to somewhere in the corner that's well out of the way. So I'm using these stones in the top left hand of the frame here and manually focus on that. So that's nicely in focus, which you'd probably be able to see on this iPhone footage, which I'm also taking at the same time. So we'll take that one. There's our 2-second timer cut in. That one's taken. Again, have a quick look to make sure I don't have to do that again. And lo and behold, it's beautifully in focus. So the next one I want to get to ensure is in focus is the shell as it goes out of the frame at the top of the image here. So I'm going to focus in on that, and again it's a slightly different position I'm having to focus at, and that is massively detailed. I don't know if you can see that compared to out of focus to in focus. It's only a tiny amount of movement on the ring on the camera, the focusing ring. So we'll have that image now as well. Hopefully these will all stack together reasonably well. So the last image I want to take is of, or at least the same image, but the focus point is going to be the bottom left hand corner, which is this stone, reddish coloured stone here, and we've got that absolutely tack sharp, and we'll have that image as well. Okay, so that's happening. That's happened. I'm going to now switch across to the other room and get these images off the camera, off the SD card. We'll pop them into Lightroom, have a look at them, do the initial adjustments in Lightroom, and pull them across into both Photoshop and Helicon Focus and see which one of them gives us the best results. So let's go and do it and see what happens. It's a bit unusual actually. I've got one camera filming me and recording me. The audio is coming from the little Sony, which is over there, and the rest of it's coming from this, which is my iPhone, which I'm just using on a gimbal to sort of make the footage a bit more stable. So let's pull that together and see how it works. Okay, here we are in Lightroom. I've imported the 4 images that I took of the little still life, and here we are at the bottom. We've got all 4 of them. The first one, which was focused in this area here, is beautifully sharp, as I'd expect it to be. You can see the detail, incredible detail in this, but the further up the frame we go, it's going out of focus as I expected it would, and consequently at the far end of the frame, at the top end, it's really very out of focus. The second image was taken with the top of the frame being in focus, and you can see now we've got the incredible detail around this part of the image. And the other 2 were taken with intermediate points like the stone in the bottom right hand side I focused on. So it's slightly less detailed here than it would have been, but it's now much more detailed in this area, incredibly sharp. And the other one is pretty much the same thing, but it was focused on the other side on this stone. So we've got 4 images now, all of which have got perfectly beautifully focused parts and some parts that are less than focused. So the next trick is to export those into Helicon Focus. So we select all the images, say export, and say to Helicon Focus. Now I've already loaded them in because it takes 30 seconds or so to load them, so I'll just close Lightroom down and expand Helicon up. And the 4 images now are in Helicon Focus, and they are as we saw them in Lightroom, the first one being the one that's soft at the top but sharp at the bottom, and so on and so forth. So basically we select the images here on the right hand side and we say render, and what Helicon will do is it will build up some sort of contour map of each of the images to work out where the most focused part or the highest contrast parts are in the image, and then it will blend them together. So the left hand image is still the one that's shown in this right hand list of images, but the right hand image, this one, is actually now the fully merged image. So if we sort of zoom in on this, we can see that we've got massive amounts of detail in the top of the image, massive amounts of detail in the bottom of the image, and the mouse is running slower than my inputs to it, so it's a little bit jerky, but you can see we've got an image that everywhere you look on it, it's absolutely tack sharp, which is quite impressive. Helicon in this case has got this really down to a fine art. It's done a very good job of this image. So I can now save that image, which I'll export, save as, where is it? Save as to somewhere convenient, which happens to be the folder where I'm building the video, so that can go in there as a TIFF file, and then we'll include it in the video so that we can see the file. And I'll now move across to doing the same thing in Lightroom. So just bear with me and I'll load up Lightroom. Okay, here we are back in Lightroom. I've now got to open up Photoshop to actually do the same, or approximately the same operation, which is slightly longer winded in Photoshop. So with the 4 images selected, I right click on that and say Edit In, and then down on the right hand side of this menu it says Open as Layers in Photoshop. We want them as separate layers because they'll need to be aligned in case any focus breathing that the lens might have done has occurred as I've changed the focus point. The lens I use, the 24-70 G Master, doesn't really suffer from focus breathing, but from the point of view of merging multiple images that are supposed to be the same together, it's a good idea to actually allow Photoshop to align the images. So as these images come in on the right hand side here one by one, it's the same 4 images obviously, but the first operation we want to do is align them so that there is no misalignment between the different layers. That would cause it not to be able to blend them together very well, and you'd end up with a pretty poor response or poor result. So once this last image has come in, I'll select all these 4 layers. That's about done now, so all 4 layers are selected. Then go to the edit menu, and about 3/4 or 2/3 of the way down there's auto align layers. If we choose that, we can leave all these options pretty much as they are, which in this case is automatic, so we'll just say OK to that. And what it'll do is it'll compare various points on each of the 4 images, and if they're not in the same place pixel wise between image to image, it makes slight adjustments to each picture so that they are in the same position in the stack of the images vertically, if you imagine it as sort of series of images literally laid one on top of the other. So that's busily doing that at the moment, so it's a third, halfway through. When that's finished, it will probably show me some minor amount of cropping differences. Oh, it hasn't. Sometimes you end up with tiny little slivers of white along the edges where one image has had to be clipped to make the others line up with it. But as I said, the G Master Sony lens doesn't focus breathe, so I wasn't really expecting to see a misalignment between these images. And also because it was mounted on a tripod, nothing was likely to have moved really of any consequence. So we've now got the 4 images actually in Photoshop, and they're all aligned, so we know that any amount of cutting and pasting, or at least cutting one image to make another from it, is going to be correctly aligned. So the next thing we need to do is go edit again and auto blend layers. Now this is what it will do to do the focus stacking. There's 2 options: to create a panorama, which we don't want to do, but the default is to stack the images. I think it works out, given the nature of the images you provide it, which of these 2 is default. So if logically they look like a panorama, this one will be lit up, and these are clearly very close to exactly the same image, so it's decided I want to focus stack them, which is what it's going to attempt to do. So I don't need to worry about these, I just leave these both ticked. I've never had a reason to change those, so I'll give it the OK to go off and do that, and let's see what the images it comes back with. Again, this is a much more long-winded process than Helicon Focus, but it does have the option that it's easier to make manual adjustments between each of the layers if you need to. In this case, I probably don't even need to do that, and I shouldn't need to do it. But sometimes you find that it can't stitch them together perfectly, so you end up manually just keeping a piece of one of the images in a place that the blend didn't work very well. So it's now created that image, and it's put it over here. So, and it's also shown, if you notice, the mask, the actual layer mask for each of the individual photographs. So the black parts are which parts of the image it's actually using and which parts it's not using, and you can see each of the images got a different mask. The end result is the final image, which is this one. So if they're not going to be shown anyway, but I'll turn them off. This is now the final image. As you can see, it's absolutely tack sharp everywhere you look. So if I go into the magnify tool, we can see the incredible detail that we'd expect, or at least it would if I didn't get that wrong. Okay, that's slight annoyance between Lightroom and Photoshop. The magnification process is different between the 2, and I end up being caught out every time I do it. But I don't think many people would complain about the sharpness of that image in any part of the image now. So there we are. That's what was involved in focus stacking. I'm going to take this image back into Lightroom and I'm going to edit it a bit further to create a final image. It's focus stacked now, I'm happy with that, but I actually want to crop it in and make it a bit more interesting as a visual image. So I'll go off and do that, and then I'll pop the resultant image up at the end of the video. And let's hope you found this informational and instructive, and if you have any questions, please put them in the questions at the end of the video or underneath the video, and give it a thumbs up if you found it useful. That would be most helpful. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Until next time, bye.